ההרצאה הבאה שלנו היא של פרופסור אדם פרזיגר, who holds the Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch Chair in the Israel and Golda Kochivsky Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry at Bar Ilan University. He's the co-convener of the annual Oxford Summer Institute on Modern and Contemporary Judaism, University of Oxford, and the call for papers of the summer is out, so you can look in to apply. He received his BA, MA in Rabbinical Ordination from YU, Yeshiva University, and his PhD from Bar Ilan. His research focuses on the history of Jewish religious life and law in modern times. His first foray into Hungarian Judaism was his MA thesis on the life and works of the moderate Hungarian Orthodox Rabbi Shlomo Tzvi Schick, written under the mentorship of late Professor Jacob Katz, a great scholar of Jewish Hungary. Furtziger is past recipient of Bar Ilan's Outstanding Lecture Award. He is the author or editor of 8 books and over 70 articles. His full-length monograph includes Exclusion and Hierarchy Beyond Sectarianism, winner of a National Jewish Book Award, and his newest book, Agents of Change, American Jews and the Transformation of Israel Judaism in NYU Press this year. His lecture today is הפילוג ההונגרי ויהודי ארצות הברית במאה העשרים. He will give it in English.
I'm going to read the paper. I will note that it is lovely that all 3 papers focus on Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum on some level, and that sort of gives a nice form to this entire session. So I'm going to read. I don't usually do this, but decided to do so today. In my presentation today, I seek to delve into the phenomenon of cultural transformation. Specifically, I will examine how a distinct religious cultural legacy, the separatist orthodoxy of 19th century Hungary, was transplanted, recalibrated, and re-embedded within the American milieu. By analyzing the divergent paths of Rabbi Yekutiel Yehuda Leopold Greenwald and Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum of Satmar, we will observe how the same ideological roots germinated into 2 distinct American Orthodox models. The biographical proximity of these 2 figures is striking. Rabbi Teitelbaum was born in 1887 in the district capital of Sziget, Hungary. Rabbi Greenwald was born just 1 to 2 years later as a debate in 1888-89 in that very same city. Both were nurtured by the ideology of Hungarian ultra-Orthodoxy, which championed the intensification of tradition, the minimization of contact with the outside world, and the social exclusion of those who deviated from its strictures. Teitelbaum's education was grounded in the Hungarian Hasidic tradition that produced a particularly vehement synthesis between mystical traditions and the ultra-Orthodox strictures and public policies. Greenwald, too, was impacted early on by this Hasidic formula, but even while in the Hungarian Orthodox milieu, he demonstrated his eclectic curiosity, studying in both Hasidic and non-Hasidic yeshivot, including Ungvar, Boniad, Satmar, Chust, Unsdorf, and, of course, in Pressburg. Upon his arrival in Columbus, Ohio in 1924, Greenwald encountered a Jewish community that was a microcosm of the Midwestern melting pot. Unlike the dense, self-contained immigrant quarters of New York's Lower East Side, Columbus presented an environment where the pressure to acculturate was palpable and the Orthodox infrastructure was fragile. In his early years, Greenwald operated with a militant Hungarian zealotry, rejecting numerous American norms. He refused to deliver sermons in English, only speaking in Yiddish. He insisted the bima remain in the center of the synagogue and refused to perform weddings in the sanctuary, per the Hungarian Orthodox stance rooted in the rulings of the Khatam Sofer. He boycotted mixed-gender social events. In referencing modern Orthodoxy, and this is maybe the first pejorative source that you can find, look at his book from, I believe, 1939, Achlet Tzara. It's probably the first book of American hadracha, teaching how to deal with mourning Avelut, he described modern Orthodoxy as a plague that is destroying all that is holy. Parallel to Greenwald's initial approach, upon his arrival in New York in 1946, 22 years later, Teitelbaum did not seek to integrate. Instead, he sought to construct a fortress, Mivtsar. He chose to remain in Williamsburg, in Brooklyn, as a strategic bulwark against assimilation. He prohibited cooperation with modern Orthodox rabbis, and paradoxically began learning to navigate the American democratic apparatus to secure resources for his independent Hasidic institutions. In 1974, Satmar separatism reached a new zenith with the establishment of Kiryas Yoel. Here, the model shifted from an urban fortress to a sovereign, suburban, almost countryside enclave. As Nomi Stolzenberg and David Myers have illuminated, the foundations of Kiryas Yoel represent a profound American paradox. While the community appears to be a medieval shtetl transplanted to the suburban countryside of Orange County, New York State, its existence is made possible only by a radical application of the American ethos of religious freedom. Teitelbaum did not reject America. He mastered its legal mechanisms, specifically property rights, local governance, and the First Amendment to establish an explicitly illiberal community within a liberal state. Like the early Mormons seeking a Zion in the desert, or the Amish and Mennonites who utilized the freedom to be separate to maintain agrarian sectarian lives, Satmar utilized the American legal framework to achieve sectoral sovereignty. In Kiryas Yoel, the community controls every facet of life from housing to education. It is a quintessentially American story, using the protections of a secular democracy to build a wall against that very democracy's cultural influence. By contrast, as Greenwald's tenure in Columbus, Ohio lengthened, his initial militancy gave way to a nuanced, pragmatic moderation. His actions reflect a realization or acceptance, tacit acceptance, that the American frontier required a different set of survival tools than the Hungarian bastion of orthodoxy. This was not a full surrender of principle, but a tactical pivot toward advancing acculturation without assimilation. He began to view the American environment not as a plague, but as a space where orthodoxy could be sustained through civic engagement. He shifted from a boycotter of modern institutions to a scholar who maintained research ties with Reform colleagues and engaged in the broader cultural debates of the city. His halachic flexibility grew as he recognized that rigid barriers, such as his previous ban on weddings inside the synagogue, were driving the youth toward total secularization. In his final years, his permission to remove the physical mechitza, partition, marked his ultimate conclusion that the internalized boundaries of American Jewish identity were more vital for survival than the external barriers of the old world. He maintained that there had to be separate seating, but without a mechitza. To explain this divergence between Greenwald and Teitelbaum, despite their common Hungarian Orthodox roots in Sziget, we can consider a variety of factors. One, Greenwald's early exposure was not only to the world of Hungarian yeshivot. Afterwards, he traveled to Germany, where he did university studies in Frankfurt. He also served as a radio operator in the Austro-Hungarian army in World War I, which gave him functional tools for traversing the modern sphere. Teitelbaum's legacy was one of pure militancy, viewing the world through the lens of a fortress already established by his family in Sziget and then himself in Satmar, etc. Second, the Holocaust and migration timing. Greenwald arrived in America in 1924 during a period where he had to negotiate for Orthodoxy's survival at a time where conservative Judaism was making inroads and was indeed becoming the most popular and most ingrained Jewish movement in America in the mid-20th century. By contrast, Teitelbaum, who was a year or two older, arrived only in 1946, together almost immediately with a robust, traumatized wave of survivors who had no interest in negotiation, only in reconstruction. These two approaches represent the internalization of these are two, I would say, background. Well, one is a background explanation. The second one is an American historical immigration stage. And I think these are very important things to always keep in mind when we think about how people translate the ideas that they bring with them to new spaces. The third explanation, though, relates to two different traditions within America that I've a little bit alluded to, but I want to expand upon. Greenwald's path aligns with the observations already in 1832 of Alexis de Tocqueville, who noted that in America, religion and liberty were intimately united rather than opposed. In Europe, the process of emancipation often forced a zero-sum choice. One could be a citizen of the state or a subject of traditional religion, as the secular state viewed clerical authority as a rival. Greenwald embraced the American civil religion model, where religious institutions provide the moral and ethical scaffolding for a free society. By becoming a patriotic American Orthodox leader, he indicated that traditional religion could serve as a pillar of the democratic fabric. His model suggests that orthodoxy is most secure when it is a visible, participating member of the American national community, acting as the moral heart of the republic. Sotomayor discovered that America offers a second alternative, equally valid path, the freedom to be separate. This model, shared by the Amish Mennonites and the early Mormons, exploits the lack of a centralized state church to create private, sovereign spaces. By securing municipal borders, Teitelbaum transformed a religious sect into a political entity. He celebrated the concept that in the United States, the separation of church and state does not just protect the individual's conscience, it allows for the creation of illiberal states within a state that utilize the tools of democracy to reject its own cultural values. Ultimately, while their communal architectures appeared vastly different, both Greenwald and Teitelbaum were engaged in a singular shared project: the preservation of a robust and independent Orthodox presence on American soil. This was not a passive survival, but a creative reassertion of their perceptions of the heroic spirit of their 19th century Hungarian predecessors, the fierce defenders of tradition who refused to yield to the pressures of their times. Both men navigated the novel environment of mid-20th century America by leveraging the specific political, legal, and cultural principles of their local surroundings. Whether it was Greenwald utilizing the Tocquevillian integration of religion and civic duty in the Midwest, or Teitelbaum mastering the legal mechanics of American pluralism to secure an enclave in upstate New York. They indicated that their Hungarian roots were not a burden, but a versatile toolkit. In doing so, they ensured that the separatist impulse of the old world did not vanish. Instead, it evolved into two distinct, powerful, and enduring American archetypes. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pfalziger. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Fascinating. I love the comparison. Just an anecdote, because 18 years ago I heard you talk about Greenwald's library, about its amazing prolific authorship, and then I asked you. You remember what I asked you?
Sure.
Yeah. How could you forget? I asked you that you describe his community as completely detached from his own his wagon of cultural wealth. I mean, whoever read his Toys and Dior, his fantastic books, he knows everything about everyone. He's the gossip chapter in every Hungarian newspaper ever to be published. He knew everything, and his community knew nothing. They knew a lot about themselves, but nothing about his background. And I asked you, why on earth would he publish these books over and over and over if no one reads them? And then you told me, it's a good question that I ask myself every day, why on earth we publish books that no one, even our mothers, read. And well, apparently he had the same sickness as we do. So thank you very much. It was,
so that's
I cited that hundreds of times. That's your most cited work, believe me.
I hope not. I hope not. So I'll just say, first of all, that going from the last statement, maybe that experience was more formative for me than I realized, because I have moved over time to think more about audience and about my reader constituency when I write. And as Mati just pointed out, my book that just came out this year is definitely within the academic spectrum, and it was published by NYU Press. But I really tried to write a book that is accessible, and I'm very pleased in the reviews that I've had so far, what people have said, that it is accessible to a broader public. And I think that's very important. I don't see that as a minus. On the contrary, I think that is a good thing, and I encourage all of us, to the degree that we can, to make our work accessible. I think it's important for the world. I think it's important for the university. It's important for us, too. It actually relates a little bit to the question we were talking before about Hasidic writers and how they write. Beyond that, I think that, in a way, I'll just take what you said as a sort of a support for what I said here. I think that one way of looking at impact of one's formative environment is to think about, how they, like Teitelbaum, he takes the zealotry and he moves it further, and he takes it and he adjusts it to America, but he really goes all the way with it. But there are other ways where this concept of, in the Talmud they talk about, or it's Girsa de Yankuta, the early exposures, especially if one isn't pushing back on them and one celebrates them, how they utilize them. And I think that's something that we have to be more conscious of. So one way is the way I describe here. Another way is by memorializing it, or making sure that people don't forget about it. So yes, it is important for people to read our books, but I actually believe that there's certainly all of the evolution of Wissenschaft des Judentum after World War II, in many ways, is about memorialization. It's about preservation. Aryeh Edrei wrote this really good article about the difference between Haredim and non-Haredim, and how they do Holocaust memorialization, Zikaron. And when you call yeshiva Punovich, what are you doing? Why are all Hasidic dynasties till this day named after European cities, except for Boston, Pittsburgh, and a few others? But there are none named after Sderot, or named after Chatzor Glilit, or Bat Yam, even though there are Hasidic groups there. So I think that's, to me, that's a wonderful thing. So I think that in many ways he's a pioneer of that. He's writing early, even before, almost like parallel to Ansky, if you think about it. And Ansky's, a shtetl exhibit already in the 1920s. There's a realization after World War I that world is changing, but we have a responsibility to sustain it, each one in the perspective. So thank you.
I would like to follow up on this preservation and memorialization, which is also really interesting connection between, Greenwald's Tausendjahr, but also what happens with Satmar Hasidim, with this Mishpoches Rabbonim in Ungarn, this whole memorialization of Hungarian rabbis, so this Hungarian myth, or the strengthening of Hungarian myth. So is there any connection besides their location or dislocation in that sense?
I'm not, there are two much bigger experts in Satmar sitting in the session than me, so I want to be careful. But I think that there are two levels going on here that, in response to what you're saying, and it connects for sure. One is the issue of what you call foundational myths, and how foundational myths are used. And so I think that the fact that you see historical writing among Hasidim in these various journals and these books that come out, or like Zechor Yemot Olam, 3 volumes, all that stuff, is really, really interesting. And then in the 3rd volume, they're already talking about the Congress and the Knesset in Israel. I think that there is this power. It's ironic. The people who were so critical of Geschichte der Juden have drafted history, what people call Haredi historiography. It doesn't matter, but there's a realization that Zechor Yemot Olam tool is very powerful. So I think that they use it in their own way, but they're certainly recognizing that power. But I also think there's a certain, I don't know if this is the right word, there's a certain assimilation. I mean, I remember the first time I came to the library, I think it was in Jerusalem, and I started to see Hasidim sitting there. And that was, there were individuals, there were a bunch of them, and then I'd see them in Bar Ilan. After a while, it's just normative. I think that, I'm going to say this in a positive way, maybe even a positivistic way, maybe even an idealistic way. I've always thought of academic Judaic studies broadly as this great evening of the table where everyone can sit at the table, where Jews and non-Jews, where secular Jews and all types of observant Jews, where Jews from different countries, non-Jews, where everyone can share. And I think it's fascinating that now Hasidim and ultra-Orthodox Jews of various types have begun to sit at the table. And I don't know if it's an assimilation or it's just a recognition that these are important tools. But I think that when Satmar does some of those things, I think those are the two different forces at play there. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I just want to know that basically, according to your description, it's quite clear that beyond the differences in background and ideology and the context of work, actually, when Greenwald writes history, it's a kind of acknowledging that this Jew is now dead, and I'm kind of burying it and memorializing it, while Deutsch believes that it's still alive. And I'm just reviving it. You use the word shtetl, and actually says, okay, we have to rebuild or recontinue actually the old shtetl in new ways. Basically, quite contrary to what you would say. Once again, Deutsch is more optimistic, while Greenwald is kind of accepting the evil. And actually, I'm not sure even about that, because it seems to be quite laboratory.
So first of all, thank you. I don't see, and I tried not to present Greenwald in that kind of binary, because I think he's partially like you're saying, Benny, but I think he also sees value, and he's trying to find ways to introduce the value even in a very different context. But I will say, and this is something that I try to avoid, but is obviously the biographical element in all this. So I had the privilege I did not have the privilege of seeing Greenwald's library, because a little bit was given away to HUC in Cincinnati, and most of it was burnt down. And it's clear that his partner in life did not have any interest in what he was doing. There are letters between Marvin Fox, Mark Shapiro has published some of these pieces. Really, really tragic that he had one of the best Judaic libraries in America, and it's gone. Many of his memoirs, many of his writings don't exist. But I did, on a trip to Denver, Colorado, get to do 3 things. I gave some talks. I went skiing in Vail, and that was the best. And I sat with Greenwald's son, who was 90 at the time and passed away since then. Lovely, lovely man. And he talked to me a lot about the generational gap between Greenwald and his children. And in terms of, this relates to what Tzachi said as well, I think one of the pieces of Greenwald that is there is the difference between when he first came and even into, let's say, let's say the first 20 years where he's among immigrants, and as the second generation comes into play, the distance, and this is such a classic trope, the immigrant rabbi who starts out, actually, there's a wonderful book about a Philadelphia Catholic priest who spent his years with an immigrant community, and they found his memoirs after he died, and a professor from Temple University published it. And what is clear there is that he's not the stopgap against, the hedge against Americanization. He's the bridge that enables people to become Americanized without losing their roots, without feeling completely having to abandon where they came from. They can sort of be part, and I think that was Greenwald in the early stages. As time goes on and he has a more second, third generation constituency, not only in his synagogue, but even in his own home, I think that there's a lot of disillusionment, and in some ways he tries to find ways to adjust. In other ways he surrenders and kind of gives up. And that came across very much in my discussions with his son, which were sad, but which were really, really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you so much.